welcome to another episode of Design Under Influence, a show that focuses on helping architecture, design, and engineering firms use technology as your competitive advantage. I'm your host, Alex Osenenko, and the CEO of ArcIT is my co-host. I'm very honored to co-host the show with him. His name is?
Boris Rappaport. Well, welcome everybody to our show, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Hey, let's jump right in a topic. People are busy, right? So let's start by unpacking this new term and what it means. In fact, in the business circles I'm in, various clubs and whatnot for entrepreneurs, founders, people are buzzing about desktop as a service. You call some of this VDI. I want to unpack this. Like, this is a solution to remote work. That is the point of conversations in a lot of businesses right now. So let's try to unpack this. Boris, what does that mean to you? Like, what desktop as a service? How is it a new infrastructure? How does it work? Give us first of all, a high level.
All right. So at the high level, desktop as a service is part of the concept called VDI. And what that is virtual desktop infrastructure. What that means is that we've had this technology for about 15 years where we could virtualize the servers, but only in the last 5 years, we've really started to virtualize the desktops. And it's become mainstream really in the last year, where it's become cost effective to bring to the business. And what it basically means is you have a big box, either in your office or in a cloud, that houses these virtual workstations, right? So it's one physical box that has virtual workstations running on it, and your people can use cheap devices like iPads or low-end computers or even mobile phones, if they can see the graphics on the screen, to access these virtual desktops and do all of their work, because all the processing power and all the storage that it needs actually lives on this box.
Interesting. Right away, like this, I guess, springs to my mind as an objection. Well, isn't like architecture and or design software super heavy? Like, what are you talking about? How can this run on an iPad or even let's say a Chromebook?
Exactly. And what we've been able to do in the last 5 years, and especially in the last year, is to virtualize not only just the regular kind of processor, the regular RAM, but also with the NVIDIA virtual technologies, we can virtualize the graphics cards and the heavy graphics components that are required to run architecture and design software. So you have to remember, all of the processing is actually happening on that virtual infrastructure. All you're doing is you're accessing it even from your mobile device. You're just sending the clicks to the machine, and then the machine returns output back to you.
Wow. Sounds super futuristic, but if you think about this, connecting to what I hear about PlayStation 5 coming out, it's isn't that virtualized? I don't know how much you know about it or heard about it, but what in my reading and stuff, I'm not a huge gamer, but I'm curious, that tech is usually the leading edge game tech. And so that, a lot of capabilities of PlayStation 5 will be related to cloud computing, as far as I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's what I heard as well. But like you just mentioned, I'm not really into, gaming as much on that front. So I don't know the exact details, but yeah, you're basically, we're kind of doing that with all the other stuff. We haven't been able to do it with graphics up until most recently, right? But now we're able to do that as well. So as long as all the computing is happening somewhere in a remote location and your device just sends the inputs and receives the outputs, that's basically the technology we're talking about. It's virtualization technology, remote access technology, and remote desktop technology.
It sounds fascinating. It sounds incredibly efficient if you think about it. Like, say, Google and stuff, they have these huge data centers, and that's a lot of processing happens there. And so bringing that to an end consumer was only a matter of time. But you saying it's here now, okay? And I think we're implementing for one of the customers, or will be very shortly. But let me ask you this: cost effective. Like I think people listening right now, watching right now, be like, okay, Boris, that's nice, futuristic talk you just gave us. But you know what? I run a business. My resources are limited. So talk to us about cost.
So there are various ways to look at it, right? Because in the end, it's about having the cost benefit analysis. But at a straight up cost, for example, if I were to, if I have 100-person architecture firm, right, and we run, heavy graphics applications, we run Revit, we run Enscape or Lumen, which is 3D software to visualize all our Revit models. We're basically using workstations that cost us anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000, right, for each one of our employees. So if it's a 100-person firm, and let's just say it's a $4,000 computer, then it's $400,000 that you're investing into your.
But does everyone? Sorry to interrupt. I just want to be conservative here, or like realistic. Does everyone need that expensive workstation, or only architects?
Only architects. So all right, well.
Sorry to burst your bubble.
Now you make me do math, man. Come on.
No, just like, let's say 20. You need 20 or 30 of those stations, right?
Let's just say, 70% of most firms are architects, right? So 70 computers times 4, 280 grand, right? Now, the other people usually get lower end computers, but they're still get computers that are powerful enough. And I think at most of the firms that we work with, everybody kind of gets a standard computer just so that we can move them around and swap, right? So even people who are in accounting may still have the $4,000 computer just because it's easy to buy in bulk and to standardize.
So the equipment in a 100-person architecture firm runs anywhere from 300 to 500K.
Yeah, quite possibly. And usually these workstations kind of get outdated within 3 to 4 year periods, so they need to be replaced every 3 to 4 years, right? At 3 years, you start thinking about it, probably replace them at 4.
Okay. And the reason for that is we already had an episode on this, but just a reminder for folks, this equipment gets end of life very quickly. And not only processing power, it's just the boards and the way it's designed. It's not designed to survive beyond that or be reliable and effective beyond that. Is that right?
Right. Be reliable for business use. You start seeing issues. Your employees start losing productivity because there's more issues, and so on and so on. It's easier to go out and at that point buy a new machine that deal with these issues all the time. So for the estimate that we're doing right now, that's basically kind of numbers that we're looking at. So now imagine that all I really need to do is build an infrastructure so that all of my machines are virtual. Now, also let's remember that since we're working remotely right now, most of our heavy use machines are sitting in our office with no people in front of them, right? And we're still using our home laptop or home computer or a device that we have at home to connect to those machines, right? So basically, we're already at a point where we're using one kind of device that does all the processing and lives on our network and accesses all our files and opens all our models and does all our graphics, and then a remote device that we have at home that may not be as powerful.
Gotcha. And what about the so the cost of equipment? So I sense there's some savings, significant savings in the cost of equipment itself. What about the efficiency? Like let's put aside the remote work environment we're living right now, because I think that's a huge benefit that we can unpack this on its own right. But beyond that, are there any efficiency gains from a speed perspective or access perspective or security perspective?
Well, there are definitely, so the product itself, the VDI product, and depending which one we choose, there's various players in the market, but they all do very similar things. Allows us to control who has access to what, and allows us to also essentially virtualize not only the full workstation, but individual applications, and then I assign those applications to our employees, right? So a person would just go to a website, log into the portal, and then see either their workstation or applications that are assigned to them. And that way we can control access that people have to our internal resources, right? So it makes the control of it easier. Now, and also these people are not connecting from their home computers, not connecting directly to our network. So that secures it as well in a way where we can bring, for example, in your home, you have a kid that downloaded a bunch of games. My son does that all the time, right? That can cause some issues because the games may have some security flaws in them. We're not bringing that to our infrastructure, right? We're only sending clicks back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
Mm. And the topic of phishing, social engineering, hacking of all sorts is just red hot right now. You look at LinkedIn, like that's all people talking about because it's so raw, so real. I mean, hospitals are getting hacked, health systems are getting hacked. People are now dying because of these ransomware crooks and all kinds of things going on. So I bet this is front and center for a lot of your customers. Are you hearing the buzz, or are you having to convince people to go that route? Oh, and by the way, what does a transition or implementation looks like? Sounds pretty involved.
Wow, you just asked like 4 questions.
I know. I love to wrap a question within a question and hand you the ball.
Thanks, man. Appreciate that. So going back to the topic of phishing, even though it's front and center, when we talk about virtual desktop infrastructure or virtualization or desktop as a service, it does not necessarily come to play in that sense, right? However, having centralized management over all your devices, be it virtual or physical, does help in terms of security, right? It's much easier to roll out patches to virtual desktop. Because your IT people don't have to go from desktop to desktop to get stuff rolled out. It all gets rolled into an image and then automatically distributed to all the virtual components that we have. So that piece definitely helps in terms of security. And then, sorry, what was the other question?
Well, the other question, maybe it's a big one to tackle on its own. The transition, like it as a business owner, it sounds scary to me and quite involved. Is it? Am I right to presume that?
There are definitely some implementation costs there, right? But so altogether, again, and there also, I think, when we talk about costs and stuff that's involved, there's an entry point for the size of the firm you have, right? So when we specifically talk about VDI as an on-premise components to replace your physical systems, we're probably talking about firms that are about 80 people in size or more. That's when it makes the most financial sense, right? If you're below that, then you have to really look at what the cost benefit is and try to find out if this is for you. I mean, the improvements are enormous in terms of ease of use, ease of access for your remote people, security as we talked about, but you're probably going to pay a little more than what you're spending on hardware right now. So you have to make sure that makes sense for you.
We should do a case study for the customer we're going to roll out for. I think there are about 100 people, right? So,
Yep.
So that would be an awesome case study to share with the listeners. So time-wise, what does it look like to get up on something like this? What do you estimate go from like, hey, sign the contract to, actually being fully on the remote desktop?
Well, implementation would take, I'd say, about 3 weeks.
That's it? Wow.
Yeah, so the implementation is pretty straightforward. But as you're doing the financial feasibility study, what we also recommend is doing a pilot before the actual full implementation, right? So this is where we can come in and do a small implementation so that your end users, and we ask to choose from a few different groups, right? One would be an architect and designer. One would be somebody who is an office worker. One could be, somewhat of a power user of graphics app, right? So not just an architect or designer, but somebody who's actually always doing 3D renderings and things like that. So we get those people to use the system and give us their feedback so that we can properly tune it or look at additional options that we may need to implement. So that process before the actual implementation can also take 3 to 4 weeks just to iron everything out. Once we have that all ironed out, then the implementation is pretty straightforward. And obviously, as any new system, you need to provide some additional training for the user, making sure that they can access it properly. And support and management is also something that we recommend. Not just having professionals look after your systems when you implement it is better than trying to do it yourself, obviously.
Can people use existing machines beyond implementation, or I guess you said any machines, right? So existing ones will work.
Yeah. So if we already have the hardware that's in place, we're basically extending the life of that hardware because they can now use those machines, which are becoming less powerful and more likely to break. They can still use them to access the virtual desktop. So that basically prolongs their life, for maybe instead of 3-4 years, we're doing 5 to 7 years because they don't have to do the heavy processing anymore.
So almost double the useful life of your equipment. Wow. Yep. Okay, that sounds like a $400K back in my pocket. Yeah, man, you got me listening. So what is the, let me ask you about more specifically some of the things I'm thinking about is like throttling computing power. Is it part of this? Like, when you say tuning the system, are you tuning the computing power versus cost? Or what are you tuning?
Yeah, well, we're trying to figure out if the environment that we've initially spec'd out will work, right? Because everybody is a different use case. So we need to make sure that what we've put in place and have assumed for what people need to use certain pieces of software, right? And do certain tasks like power user versus regular user versus office worker, for example, is correct. And we may need to make adjustments on the fly to make sure that they're getting the right performance that they're looking for. Now, once we identify all that, then we can go back and see if our design actually accommodated for all of that, or if we need to maybe add a little bit additional horsepower. Usually what we find is that we're pretty good at sizing those out just because we work with so many architecture firms and we know the software so well.
Very interesting. And so going back and talking about remote work, to me, like all the pieces of the puzzle fit in really well. It almost answers itself. Like, are there any intricacies or advantages that I have not, like as a business owner, I can't think about right now? Because to me, it sounds very, very simple. Now my workforce could be virtualized at any point, and I could be like achieve equal productivity as people will be in the office working in those expensive workstations. But are there other benefits that I'm not thinking about?
Yeah, so let's look at something that you mentioned at the beginning of the show, but I don't think we've talked about. So we've talked about VDI, which is basically the overall concept. There's also a concept of desktop as a service. And what that allows us to do is to move all this VDI and storage infrastructure in our files, not to have it on our premises, in our data center, in our office, but to actually have it in the cloud, right? Using providers, either like us, ArcIT, or just any public cloud provider like Microsoft Azure or Amazon AWS or Google Cloud, to actually run these virtual workstations in a cloud and have all your files stored in that same place, and then access it remotely through the use of the VDI technology. So that improves not only our ability for remote access, but also what if we decide not to have an office anymore, right? Think about that. Like, we don't have the place to put this infrastructure anymore, and we don't need to. It will live in a cloud. You don't pay rent. So that's one of the benefits. Another one is, now that it lives in a cloud, there's virtually, any cloud service has disaster recovery that's already baked into it. So, for example, when we're in our local office, one of the risks is, well, what happens if there's a power outage, right? Can our people now access our systems? What happens if our internet goes out? What happens if there's a fire in the building? So all of those get addressed when we start using desktop as a service in the cloud, because most of the reliable cloud providers that I've just mentioned will never have those issues, right? Their power will never go out, their internet will never fail. And if there's a fire in the data center, they have other data centers that can run your desktops.
So I imagine they have some significant redundancy and those kinds of things built in to ensure, because this is critical. This is business critical. This is not Mickey Mouse. This is not nice to have. This is not, tuning out with Netflix. This is, and I'm not saying anything bad about Netflix, great service, but look, if it's not working today, like, okay, I'll be, a little upset, but if I can't access my email for work, for example, or my project management, I'm out of business.
Correct. And so again, the public cloud providers I've mentioned, as well as other cloud providers like ourselves and others who do this type of work, basically guarantee that there is 99.9% uptime, virtually no downtime whatsoever for these systems.
Gotcha. Well, this was very informative. I hope those of you on the other side of the internet got the download on this. It's pretty cool. You can find us, ArcIT folks, both Boris and I, at ArcIT, getarcit.com. We're also on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn. You need us. We're on Instagram even, right?
Insta, baby.
Yeah, we're Instagramming. And then, so all your difficult questions, pipe them our way, and we'd be happy to tackle them for you. If you need help with your IT services or just consultation, again, reach out to us. Otherwise, have a wonderful day. Stay productive, stay safe, be smart, and smile. Thanks a lot for watching.
Bye, everyone.